please the Tribunal. At the close of yesterday's session, we were discussing and had just completed reading the excerpts from the interrogation of the 6th day of October, 1945, wherein the defendant Alfred Rosenberg was questioned. There have already been introduced documents 017 PS and 019 PS, and I have read excerpts from them. The Tribunal will recall that they are letters written by the defendant Saukel to the defendant Rosenberg requesting the assistance of the defendant Rosenberg in the recruitment of additional foreign laborers. I refer to them in passing by way of recapitulation with respect to the defendant Saukel's participation in this slave labor program and also the assistance of the defendant Rosenberg. Also, the defendant Saukel received help from the defendant Seyss-Inquart, who was the Reichskommissar for the occupied Netherlands. And I refer again to the transcript of the interrogation under oath of the defendant Saukel, which was read from yesterday, and I now refer to another part of it. This interrogation, or the transcript of it, will be found in the rear of the document book. It's the very last document. And I wish to quote particularly from it. It's the first question. And the question is, quoting, "For a moment, I want to turn our attention to Holland. It is my understanding that the quotas for the workers from Holland were agreed upon, and then the numbers given to the Reichskommissar Seyss-Inquart to fulfill. Is that correct?" Answer, yes, that is correct. Question, after the quota was given to Seyss-Inquart, it was his mission to fulfill it with the aid of your representatives, was it not? Answer, yes, this was the only possible thing for me to do, and the same applied to other countries. And the defendant, Hans Frank, who was the Governor General of the Government General of Poland, also participated in the filling of the defendant Saukel's quota requirements. And I refer again to the interrogation of the defendant Saukel and to page 1 of the excerpts from the transcript of this interrogation as it appears in the document book. Question, was the same procedure substantially followed of allocating quotas in the general government Poland? Answer, yes, I have to basically state again that the only possibility I had in carrying through these missions was to get in touch with the highest German military authority in the respective country and to transfer to them the orders of the Fuhrer and ask them very urgently, as I have always done, to fulfill these orders. Question, such discussions in Poland, of course, were with the General Governor Frank. Answer, yes, I spent a morning and afternoon in Krakow twice or three times, and I personally spoke to General Governor Frank. Naturally, there was also present Secretary Dr. Goebbels. The SS, as in most matters involving the use of force and brutality, also extended its assistance. And we refer to document number 1292 PS, which is USA Exhibit number 225. This document, 1292 PS, is the report of the Reichschancellor Lammers of a conference with Hitler, which was attended by, among others, the Defendant Sauckel and the Defendant Speer, and Himmler, the Reichsfuhrer SS. And I turn to page 2 of the document, beginning with the third line from the top of the page of the English text. And it is page 4, paragraph 2 of the German text. And quoting, reads as follows. The plenipotentiary for employment of labor, Sauckel, declared that he will attempt with fanatical determination to obtain these workers. Until now, he has always kept his promises as to the number of workers to be furnished. With the best of intentions, however, he is unable to make a definite promise for 1944. He will do everything in his powers to furnish the requested manpower in 1944. Whether it will succeed depends primarily on what German enforcement agents will be made available. His project cannot be carried out with domestic enforcement agents. End of the quotation. Yes, I will. There are additional quotations, as the tribunal may observe, in this very part from which I have been reading, but I intend to refer to them again a little further on. The defendant Sauckel participated in the formulation of the overall labor requirements for Germany and passed out quotas to be filled by and with the assistance of the individuals and agencies referred to in the certain knowledge that force and brutality were the only means whereby his demands could be met. And turning to document 1292 PS again, and quoting from page 1 directly, small 1, a conference took place with the Fuhrer today, which was attended by the plenipotentiary for the employment of labor, Gauleiter Sauckel, the secretary for armament and war production, Speer, the chief of the Supreme Command of the Army, General Field Marshal Keitel, General Field Marshal Milch, the acting Reichsminister for Food and Agriculture, State Secretary Back, the Minister of the Interior, Reichsfuhrer of the SS Himmler, and myself. And then, in parenthesis, the Minister for Foreign Affairs and the Minister of National Economy had repeatedly asked to be permitted to participate prior to the conference, but the Fuhrer did not wish their attendance. Continuing the quotation, the Fuhrer declared in his introductory remarks, I want a clear picture. 1, how many workers are required for the maintenance of German war economy? A, for the maintenance of present output. B, to increase its output. 2, how many workers can be obtained from occupied countries? Or how many can still be gained in the Reich by suitable means? Increased output, in parenthesis. For one thing, it is this matter of making up for losses of death, infirmity, the constant fluctuation of workers, and so forth. And further, it is a matter of procuring additional workers. End of the quotation. No, it is not the end of the quotation. Continuing on. The plenipotentiary for the employment of labor, Sauckel, declared that in order to maintain the present pool of workers, he would have to add at least 2.5, but probably 3 million new workers in 1944. Otherwise, production would fall off. Reichsminister Speer declared that he needs an additional 1.3 million laborers. However, this would depend on whether it will be possible to increase production of iron ore. Should this not be possible, he would need no additional workers. Procurement of additional workers from occupied territory would, however, be subject to the condition that these workers will not be withdrawn from armament and auxiliary industries already working there. For this would mean a decrease of production of these industries which he could not tolerate. Those, for instance, who are already working in France in industries mentioned above must be protected against being sent to work in Germany by the plenipotentiary for the employment of labor. The Fuhrer agreed with the opinions of Reichsminister Speer and emphasized that the measures taken by the plenipotentiary for the employment of labor should order no circumstances which would lead to the withdrawal of workers from armament and auxiliary industries working in occupied territories, because such a shift of workers would only cause disturbance of production in occupied countries. The Fuhrer further called attention to the fact that at least 250,000 laborers will be required for preparations against air attacks in the field of civilian air raid protection. For Vienna alone, 2,000 to 2,500 are required immediately. The plenipotentiary for the employment of labor must add at least 4 million workers to the manpower pool, considering that he requires 2.5 million workers for maintenance of the present level, that Reich Minister Speer needs 1.3 million additional workers, and that the above-mentioned preparations for security measures against air attacks calls for 0.25 million laborers. Referring again to the end of the quotation, referring again to page 2, first full paragraph of the English text of this document, and at page 5, paragraph 1 of the German text, quoting as follows: the Reichsfuhrer SS explained that the enforcement agents put at his disposal are extremely few, but that he would try helping the Saukel project to succeed by increasing them and working them harder. The Reichsfuhrer SS made immediately available 2,000 to 2,500 men from concentration camps for air raid preparations in Vienna. End of the quotation. Passing the next paragraph of this document and continuing with the paragraph entitled Results of the Conference, and quoting it directly after small figure 1, the plenipotentiary for employment of labor shall procure at least 4 million new workers from occupied territories. End of the quotation. Moreover, as document 3012 PS, which has already been offered as the USA Exhibit 190, revealed, the defendant Saukel, in requesting the assistance of the Army for the recruitment of 1 million men and women from the occupied Eastern territories, informed the defendant Keitel that prompt action was required and that, as in all other occupied countries, pressure had to be used if other measures were not successful. Again, as revealed by document 018 PS, which has been offered and from which excerpts have been read, the defendant Saukel was informed by the defendant Rosenberg that the enslavement of foreign labor was achieved by force and brutality, notwithstanding his knowledge of these conditions, the defendant Sauckel continued to request greater supplies of manpower from the areas in which the most ruthless methods had been applied. Indeed, when German field commanders on the Eastern Front attempted to resist or restrain the defendant Sauckel's demands because forced recruiting was swelling the ranks of the partisans and making the Army's task more difficult, Sauckel sent a telegram to Hitler in which he implored Hitler, to intervene. And I make reference to document number 407, Roman numeral 2, PS, which bears USA Exhibit 226. This document is a telegram from Sauckel to the defendant Sauckel to Hitler, dated the 10th day of March, 1943. It's rather a long message, but I wish to call particularly to the attention of the tribunal the last paragraph on page 1 of the English text. It's page 2. Paragraph 5 of the German text. Quoting the last paragraph of the English text, "Therefore, my Führer, I ask you to abolish all orders which oppose the obligation of foreign workers for labor, and to report to me kindly whether the concept of the mission presented here is still right." And turning to paragraph 5 on the first page of this English text, we find these words, quoting them directly: "If the obligation for labor and the forced recruiting of workers in the East is not possible anymore, then the German war industry and agriculture cannot fulfill their tasks to the full extent." End of the quotation. And the next paragraph: "I myself have the opinion that our army leaders should not give credence under any circumstances to the atrocity and propaganda campaign of the partisans. The generals themselves are greatly interested that the support for the troops is made possible in time. I should like to point out that hundreds of thousands of excellent workers going into the field as soldiers now cannot possibly be substituted by German women, not used to work even if they are trying to do their best. Therefore, I have to use the people of the Eastern Territories."
I think you should read the next paragraph.
"I myself report to you that the workers belonging to all foreign nations are treated humanely, correctly, and cleanly, are fed and housed well, and are even clothed. On the basis of my own services with foreign nations, I go as far as to state that never before in the world were foreign workers treated as correctly as is now happening in the hardest of all wars by the German people." In addition to being responsible for the recruitment of foreign civilian labor by force, Defendant Sauckel was responsible for the conditions under which foreign workers were deported to Germany and for the treatment to which they were subjected within Germany. We have already referred to the conditions under which these imported persons were transported to Germany, and we have read from document 2241 PS-3 to show that Sauckel knew of these conditions. Yesterday we referred at length to the brutal, degrading, and inhumane conditions under which these laborers worked and lived within Germany. And we invite the attention again of the tribunal to document 3044 PS, already offered as USA Exhibit number, what is that? 206. USA Exhibit number 206. It's the regulation number 4 of the 7th of May, 1942, issued by Sauckel as the Plenipotentiary General for the mobilization of labor, concerning recruitment, care, lodging, feeding, and treatment of foreign workers of both sexes. By this decree, Sauckel expressly directed that the assembly and operation of rail transports and the supplying of food, therefore, was the responsibility of his agents until the transports arrived in Germany. By the same regulation, the defendant Sauckel directed that within Germany, the care of foreign industrial workers was to be carried out by the German Labor Front, and that the care of foreign agricultural workers was to be carried out by the Reich Food Administration. And by the terms of this same regulation, the defendant Sauckel reserved for himself ultimate responsibility for all aspects of care, treatment, lodging, and feeding of foreign workers while in transit to and within Germany. And I refer particularly to the English text of this document, 3044 PS, USA Exhibit number 206. And the part of it that I make reference to is at the bottom of page 1 in the English text, and it appears at page 518 of the volume in the German text. And quoting directly from the English text, the care of foreign labor will be carried out, A, up to the Reich's border by my commissioners, or in the occupied areas by the competent military or civil labor mobilization agencies. Care of the labor will be carried out in cooperation with the respective competent foreign organization. B, within the area of the Reich, 1, by the German Labor Front in the cases of non-agricultural workers, 2, by the Reich Food Administration in the case of agricultural workers. The German Labor Front and the German Food Administration are bound by my directives in the carrying out of their tasks of caring for the workers. The agencies of the Labor Mobilization Administration are to give far-reaching support to the German Labor Front and the German Food Administration in the fulfillment of their assigned tasks. My competence for the execution of the care for foreign labor is not prejudiced by the assignment of these tasks to the German Labor Front and the Reich's Food Administration. End of the quotation.
Don't you think that that sort of passage is the sort of passage which might be summarized and not read? Because
Very
all
well.
that it's really stating is that Sauckel, his department and commissioners were responsible, and that's what he's saying.
Yes, indeed, Your Honor. We spelled it out, thinking that perhaps under the rule to get it into the record, it must be read fully. I quite agree that it, no
Well,
doubt,
a
is
summary of
burden
that would
on-
be quite sufficient, I think.
And in the same document, I should like to make reference to the data on page 3, paragraph Roman numeral 3 of the English text, which indicates under the title of Composition and Operation of the Transports that this function is the obligation of the representatives of the defendant Sauckel. And in paragraph C on page 5 of the English text, under the title Supply for the Transport, after setting out some responsibility for the office of the German Workers' Front, The defendant Saukel states for the rest that his offices affect the supply for the transport. The defendant Saukel had an agreement with the head of the German Labor Front, Dr. Robert Lai. And in this agreement, the defendant Saukel emphasized his ultimate responsibility by creating a central inspectorate charged with examining the working and living conditions of foreign workers. And we refer to document 1913 PS. USA Exhibit number 227. This agreement between the defendant Saukel and the then chief of the German Labor Front is published in the 1943 edition of the Reichsarbeitsblatt, Part 1 at page 588. It's a rather lengthy agreement, and I shall not read it all, or any great part of it, except such part as will indicate the basic agreements between the defendant Saukel and Lai with respect to the foreign workers and their living conditions and working conditions. On the first page of the English text, the Reichsleiter for the German Labor Front, Dr. Lai, in collaboration with the Plenipotentiary General for the Arbeitseinsatz, Gauleiter Saukel, will establish a central inspection for the continuous supervision of all measures concerning the care of the foreign workers mentioned under 1. And this will have the designation of Central Inspection for Care of Foreign Workers. End of the quotation. And paragraph 4, marked the numeral 4 in the same text, states the offices of the administration of the Arbeitseinsatz will be constantly informed by the Central Inspection for the Care of Foreign Workers of its observations, in particular, immediately in each case in which action of state organizations seems to be necessary. End of the quotation. And I should also like to call attention to the attention of the tribunal to this paragraph, which is quoted on the same page. It's the fourth paragraph down after the small number 2, and it begins with the words, "The authority of the Plenipotentiary General for the Arbeitseinsatz to empower the members of his staff and the presidents of the state employment offices to get direct information on the conditions regarding the employment of foreigners in the factories and camps will remain untouched." End of the quotation. We have already offered to the court proof that the defendant Saukel was responsible for compelling citizens of the occupied countries against their will to manufacture arms and munitions and to construct military fortifications for use in war operations against their own country and its allies. He was, moreover, responsible for having compelled prisoners of war to produce arms and munitions for use against their own countries and their actively resisting allies. The decree appointing Saukel indicates that he was appointed Plenipotentiary General for Manpower for the express purpose, among others, of integrating prisoners of war into the German war industry. And in a series of reports to Hitler, Sauckel described how successful he had been in carrying out that program. One such report states that in a single year, the defendant Sauckel had incorporated 1,622,829 prisoners of war into the German economy. And I refer to document number 407, Roman numeral 5-PS. 407, Roman numeral 5-PS, which is USA Exhibit 228. It's a letter from the defendant Sauckel to Hitler on the 14th of April, 1943. I have made reference to this document earlier, but all the figures in it, rather, I think, have been contained in another document. This is its first introduction. Quoting from the paragraphs numbered 1 and 2 of the English text, it begins, "My Führer, after having been active as plenipotentiary for Arbeitseinsatz for 1 year, I have the honor to report to you that 3,638,056 new foreign workers have been added to the German war economy between April 1st, the small number 1. I think it's 3 million, Your Honor, please. I think so. The original looks to us like 3. 3,638,056 new foreign workers have been added to the German war economy between April 1st of the last year and March 31st of this year. And then passing on a little bit, with particular reference to the prisoners of war, we find this statement. Besides the foreign civilian workers, another 1,622,829 prisoners of war are employed in the German economy. End of the quotation. A later report states that 846,511 additional foreign laborers and prisoners of war were incorporated into the German war industry. In document 407, Roman numeral 9-PS, which is also a letter from the defendant Sauckel to Hitler. And quoting from page, in part, from page 1, paragraphs 1 and 2. My Führer, I beg to be permitted to report to you on the situation of the Arbeitseinsatz for the first 5 months of 1943. For the first time, the following number of new foreign laborers and prisoners of war were employed in the German war industry. Total 846,511. End of the quotation. This use of prisoners of war in the manufacture of armaments allocated by the defendant Sauckel was confirmed by the defendant Speer, who stated that 40% of all prisoners of war were employed in the production of weapons and munitions and in subsidiary industries. And I wish to refer briefly to the paragraphs 6, 7, and 8 on page 15 of the English text of an interrogation of the defendant Speer on the 18th of October, 1945, which was offered and referred to yesterday, and has the USA exhibit number 220. And on that, quoting from paragraphs 6, 7, and 8 on page 15, paragraph 1 on page 2 of the German text. The question immediately before the answer is, will you explain that a little more? Going back, there are two questions which will establish the background for this answer. Let me understand, when you wanted labor from prisoners of war, did you requisition prisoners of war separately, or did you ask for a total number of workers? Answer. Only Schmelter can answer that directly. As far as the commitment of prisoners of war labor goes, it was effected through employment officers of the Stalags. I tried several times to increase the total number of prisoners of war that were occupied in the production at the expense of the other demand factors. Question, will you explain that a little more? Answer. In the last phase of production, that is in the year 1944, when everything collapsed, I had 40% of all prisoners of war employed in the production. I wanted to have this percentage increased. Question. And when you say employed in the production, you mean in these subsidiary industries that you have discussed, and also in the production of weapons and munitions, is that right? Yes, that is the total extent of my task.
What are the subsidiary industries, Mr. Dodd? Are those war industries?
Yes, Your Honor, war industries, if we understand it. Called, referred to many times by these defendants as the component parts in other places. I also would like to call the attention of the tribunal again to the minutes of the 36th meeting of the Central Planning Board, document R124, from which we read a number of excerpts yesterday, and to remind the tribunal that in this report of the minutes of that meeting, the defendant Speer stated that 90,000 Russian prisoners of war employed in the whole of the armament industry are for the greatest part skilled men. And we should at this point like to turn to the special responsibility now of the defendant Speer, and to discuss the evidence of the various crimes committed by this defendant Speer in planning and participating in this program of forcible deportation of the citizens of occupied countries. He was the Reichs Minister of Armaments and Munitions and chief of the organization Dodd, both of which positions he acquired on the 15th of February, 1942. And by virtue of his later acquisition of control over the armament offices of the Army, Navy, and Air Force, and the production offices of the Ministry of Economics, the defendant Speer was responsible for the entire war production of the Reich, as well as for the construction of fortifications and installations for the Wehrmacht. Proof of the positions held by the defendant Speer is supplied in his own statement as contained in document 2980-PS, which has already been offered to the tribunal and which bears exhibit number 18, USA exhibit number 18. The industries under the defendant Speer's control were really the most important users of manpower in Germany. And thus, according to the defendant Saukel, Speer's labor requirements received unconditional priority over all other demands for labor. And we refer to the transcript of the interrogation of the defendant Sauckel on the 22nd of September, 1945. It's USA Exhibit 230. It is the next to the last document in the document book. I wish to refer to page 1 of that document in paragraph 4. It's a brief reference. It's the last answer on the page. The question is asked of the defendant Sauckel, of course. Except for Speer, they would give the requirements in general for the broad field. But in Speer's work, you would get them allocated by industry and so on. Is that right? Answer. The others, I only got whatever was left, because Speer told me once in the presence of the Fuhrer that I am here to work for Speer and that mainly I am his man. End of the quotation. The defendant Speer has admitted under oath that he participated in the discussions during which the decision to use foreign forced labor was made. He has also said that he concurred in the decision and that it was the basis for the program of bringing foreign workers into Germany by compulsion. And I make reference to the interrogation of the defendant Speer of the 18th of October, 1945. It bears USA Exhibit number 220. We've already read from it. But I particularly refer to the bottom of page 12 and the top of page 13 of the English text. Question, but is it clear to you, Mr. Speer, that in 1942, when the decisions were being taken concerning the use of forced foreign labor, that you participated in the discussions yourself? Answer, yes. Question, so that I take it that the execution of the program of bringing foreign workers into Germany by compulsion under Sauckel was based on earlier decisions that had been taken with your agreement? Answer, yes, but I must point out that only a very small part of the manpower that Sauckel brought into Germany was made available to me. A far larger part of it was allocated to other departments that demanded labor. This admission is confirmed by the minutes of Speer's conferences with Hitler on the 10th, 11th, and 12th of August, 1942, in document R124, which has been offered here and from which excerpts have been read. Page 34 of that document and paragraph 1 of the English text have already been quoted. And those excerpts have been read before the tribunal yesterday. And the tribunal will recall that the defendant Speer related the outcome of his negotiations concerning the forcible recruitment of the 1 million Russian laborers for the German armaments industry. And this use of force was again discussed by Hitler and the defendant Speer on the 4th day of January 1943, as shown by the excerpts read from the document 556-PS13, where it was decided that stronger measures were to be used to accelerate the conscription of French civilian workers. We say the defendant Speer demanded foreign workers for the industries under his control and used them with the knowledge that they had been deported by force and were being compelled to work. Speer has said under oath in his interrogation of the 18th of October, 1945, paragraph 9 on page 5 of that English text, quoting it directly, "I do not wish to give the impression that I want to deny the fact that I demanded manpower and foreign manpower from Sauckel very energetically." End of the quotation. And he has admitted that he knew he was obtaining foreign labor, a large part of which was forced labor. And referring again to that same interrogation of the 18th of October, 1945, and to pages 8 and 9 of the English text, and paragraph 10 of the German text. Question: so that during the period when you were asking for labor, it seems clear, does it not, that you knew that you were obtaining foreign labor as well as domestic labor in response to your requests, and that a large part of the foreign labor was forced labor? Answer: yes. Question: so that, simply by way of illustration, suppose that on January 1, 1944, you required 50,000 workers for a given purpose. Would you put in a requisition for 50,000 workers, knowing that in that 50,000 there would be forced foreign workers? Answer: yes. End of the quotation from that document. And the defendant Speer has also said under oath that he knew at least as early as September of 1942 that workers from the Ukraine were being forcibly deported for labor into Germany. Likewise, he knew that the great majority of the workers of the Western occupied countries were slave laborers forced against their will to come to Germany. And again, referring to his interrogation on this 18th day of October in 1945, and beginning with the fourth paragraph from the bottom of page 5 of the English text, page 10, paragraph 10 on page 6 of the German text, we find this series of questions and answers. Question: when did you first find out then that some of the manpower from the Ukraine was not coming voluntarily? Answer: it is rather difficult to answer this here, that is, to name a certain date to you. However, it is certain that I knew that at some particular point of time that the manpower from the Ukraine did not come voluntarily. Question: and does that apply also to the manpower from other occupied countries? That is, did there come a time when you knew that they were not coming voluntarily? Answer: yes. Question: when in general would you say that time was, without placing a particular month of the year? Answer: as far as the Ukraine situation goes, I believe that they did not come voluntarily anymore after a few months, because immense mistakes were made in their treatment by us. I should say offhand that this time was either in July, August, or September of 1942. And turning to paragraph 11 on page 6 of the English text of this same interrogation, and page 7 and paragraph 8 of the German text, we find this series of questions and answers. Quoting: question: but many workers did come from the West, did they not, to Germany? Answer: yes. Question: that means then that the great majority of the workers that came from the Western countries, the Western occupied countries, came against their will to Germany? Answer: yes. These admissions are borne out, of course, by other evidence. For as document R124 shows, and as we have shown by the readings from it. In all countries, conscription for work in Germany could be carried out only with the active assistance of the police, and that the prevailing methods of recruitment had provoked such violence that many German recruiting agents had been killed. And again, at a meeting with Hitler to discuss the manpower requirements for 1944, which is reported in document 1292 PS, Speer was informed by the defendant Sauckel that the requirements, including Speer's requirement for 1,300,000 of additional laborers, could be met only if German enforcement agents were furnished to carry out the enslavement program in the occupied countries. Now, we say, notwithstanding this knowledge that these workers were conscripted and deported to Germany against their will, Speer nevertheless continued to formulate requirements for the foreign workers and requested their allocation to these industries which were subject to his control. Now, this is borne out by the minutes of the Central Planning Board as contained in the document R124, and particularly page 13, paragraph 4 of that English text, where Speer speaking that is page 6 in paragraph 4 of the German text. Speer speaking. Speer, now the labor problem in Germany. I believe it is still possible to transfer some from the Western territories. The Fuhrer stated only recently he wishes to dissolve these foreign volunteers, as he had the impression that the army groups were carting around with them a lot of ballast. Therefore, if we cannot settle this matter ourselves, we shall have to call a meeting with the Fuhrer to clear up the coal situation. Keitel and Zeitzler will be invited to attend in order to determine the number of Russians from the rear army territories who can be sent to us. However, I see another possibility. We might organize another drive to screen out workers for the mines from the Russian prisoners of war in the Reich. But this possibility is none too promising. End of the quotation. At another meeting of the Central Planning Board, the defendant Speer rejected a suggestion that labor for industries under his control be furnished from German sources instead of from foreign sources. And again, in this document, R124, on page 16, paragraphs 3, 4, and 5 of the English text, page 12, paragraphs 6 and 7 of the German text. Quoting the defendant Speer speaking, we do it that way. Curl collects the demands for labor necessary to complete the coal and iron plan and communicates the numbers to Sauckel. Probably there will be a conference at the Reich Marshals in the next week, and an answer from Sauckel should have arrived by then. The question of recruitment for the armaments industry will be solved together with Weger. Curl speaking, quoting Curl, I wish to urge that the allotments to the mines should not be made dependent on the recruitment of men abroad. We were completely frustrated these last 3 months because this principle had been applied. We ended December with a deficit of 25,000, and we never get replacements. The number must be made up by men from Germany. Speer, no, nothing doing. End of the quotation. We say also that the defendant Speer is guilty of advocating terror and brutality as a means of maximizing production by slave laborers. And again, referring to this document R124, and at page 42, there was a discussion concerning the supply and exploitation of labor. That excerpt has been read to the tribunal before, and I simply refer to it in passing. It's the excerpt wherein Speer said it'd be a good thing if, or the effect of it was, if nothing to be said against the SS and the police taking a hand to make these men work and produce more. We say he's also guilty of compelling Allied nationals and prisoners of war to engage in the production of armaments, munitions, and in direct military operations against their own country. We say, as chief of the organization Todd, he's accountable for its policies which were in direct conflict with the laws of war. For the organization Todd, in violation of the laws of war, impressed Allied nationals into its services. Document L191 is an International Labor Office study of the exploitation of foreign labor by Germany. We have only one copy of this document, it being this International Labor Office study printed at Montreal, Canada in 1945. We ask that the tribunal take judicial notice of it as an official publication of the International Labor Office. And on page, I might say to the tribunal with some apologies that this arrived at the time we were not able to even have the excerpt mimeographed and printed up to place in your document book, so that it is the one document which is missing from the document book which is in your hands. But I should like to quote from page 73, paragraph 2 of this study by the International Labor Office. It is not long, it's very brief. And quoting directly, it says, "The methods used for the recruitment of foreign workers who were destined for employment in the organization did not greatly differ from the methods used for the recruitment of foreigners for deportation to Germany." The organization, by the way, is the organization Todt. Going on with the quotation. "The main difference was that, since the principal activities of the organization lay outside the frontiers of Germany, foreigners were not transported to Germany, but had to work in their own country or in some other occupied country. In the recruitment drives for foreign workers for the organization, methods of compulsion as well as methods of persuasion were used, the latter usually with very little result." End of the quotation. Moreover, conscripted Allied nationals were compelled by this same organization, Todt, to actually engage in operations of war against their country. And document 407 PS discloses, 407 PS Roman numeral 8, discloses that the workers, the foreign workers, who were impressed into the organization Todt through the efforts of the Defendant Sauckel, did participate in the building of the Atlantic Wall fortifications. And as chief of the German war production, this Defendant Speer sponsored and approved the use of these prisoners of war in the production of armaments and munitions. And this has been made plain by the evidence already discussed. And to sum it up briefly, finally, we say that it shows, one, after Speer assumed the responsibility for armament production, his concern in his discussions with his co-conspirators was to secure a larger allocation of prisoners of war for his armament factories. That's been shown by the quotations from the excerpts of document R124, the minutes of the meetings of the Central Planning Board. And in this same meeting, the tribunal will recall that Speer complained because only 30% of the Russian prisoners of war were engaged in the armaments industry. We referred to a speech of Speer, document 1435 PS. We quoted from it, which he said that 10,000 prisoners of war were put at the disposal of the armaments industry upon his orders. And finally, Speer advocated the returning of escaped prisoners of war to factories as convicts. And that is shown again by document R124 at page 13, paragraph 5 of the English text, where the defendant Speer says that he has come to an arrangement
Don't you think that we've really got this sufficiently now?
Yes, I have just...
We've got Speer's own admission.
Yes,
And any number of documents which prove the way in which these prisoners of war and other laborers were brought into Germany.
Well, I just wanted to refer briefly to that passage in that document in R124 as showing that this defendant advocated having escaped prisoners of war returned to the munitions factories as...
124, do you say?
124.
What page?
13.
13.
Oh, yes. Well, I don't want to labor this responsibility of the defendant Speer's. I was anxious, or perhaps I should say we were all a little over-anxious to have the documents into the record and before the tribunal.
Which is the passage you want to refer to on page 13?
I just referred in passing to the statement which begins with the words, "We have come to an arrangement with the Reichsführer SS." We have to come, rather, to an arrangement. And the next to the last sentence it says, "The men should be put into the factories as convicts." Finally, with reference to the defendant Speer, I should like to say to the tribunal that he visited the concentration camp at Mauthausen. And he also visited factories such as those conducted by the Krupp Industries, where concentration camp labor was exploited under degrading conditions. And that despite this first-hand knowledge of these conditions, both in Mauthausen and in the places where these forced laborers were at work in factories, he continued to direct the use of this type of labor in factories under his own jurisdiction. And in support...
How do you prove he visited concentration camps?
I'm just going to refer the tribunal to page 9 of his interrogation of the 18th of October, 1945. And I refer to page 11, paragraph 5 of the German text, page 9, beginning with paragraph 9 of the English text. Question, but in general, the use of concentration camp labor was known to you and approved by you as a source of labor? Answer, yes. Question, and you knew also, I take it, that among the inmates of the concentration camps there were both Germans and foreigners? Answer, I didn't think about it at that time. Question, as a matter of fact, you visited the Austrian concentration camp personally, did you not? Answer, I didn't. Well, I was in Mauthausen once, but at that time I was not told just to what categories the inmates of the concentration camps belonged. Question, but in general everybody knew, did they not, that foreigners who were taken away by the Gestapo or arrested by the Gestapo, as well as Germans, found their way into the concentration camps? Of course, yes, I didn't mean to imply anything like that. End of the quotation. And on page 15 of this same interrogation, beginning with the 13th paragraph of the English text, page 20 in the German text, we find this question. Did you ever discuss, by the way, the requirements of Krupp for foreign labor? And the answer is, it is certain that it was reported to me
What page is this?
Page 15.
Thank you.
Beginning with paragraph 13.
Yes.
Did you ever discuss, by the way, the requirements of labor, the requirements of Krupp for foreign labor? It is certain that it is certain that it was reported to me what lack Krupp had in foreign workers. Question, did you ever discuss it with any of the members of the Krupp firm? I cannot say that exactly, but during the time of my activities, I visited the Krupp factory for more than once, and it is certain that this was discussed, that is, the lack of manpower. Before closing, I should like to take 2 minutes of the time of the tribunal to refer to what we consider to be some of the applicable law of the case for the assistance of the tribunal in considering these documents which we have offered. We refer, of course, first of all to Section 6, small b in parenthesis, and 6 small c of the charter of this tribunal. We also say that the acts of the conspirators constituted a flagrant violation of Articles 46 and 52 of the regulations annexed to the Hague Convention number 4 of 1907. Article 46 seeks to safeguard the family honor and the rights and the lives of persons in areas under belligerent occupation. Article 52 provides in part that requisitions in kind and services shall not be demanded from municipalities or inhabitants except for the needs of the army of occupation. They shall be in proportion to the resources of the country. We say that these conspirators violated this article because the labor which they conscripted was not used to satisfy the needs of the army of occupation, but on the contrary was forcibly removed from the occupied areas and exploited in the interest of the German war effort. Finally, we say that these conspirators, and particularly the defendants Saukel and Speer, by virtue of their planning, of their execution, and of their approval of this program which we have been describing for yesterday and today, the enslavement and the misuse of this forced labor, of prisoners of war, that for this they bear a special responsibility for their crimes against humanity and their war crimes. I'm
Are you finishing, Mr. Dodd?
Yes, I have concluded with
I should like to ask you why you haven't read document 3057 PS, which is Saukel's statement
yes.
on oath.
We had intended to offer that document. Counsel for the defendant, Saukel, informed me a day or two ago that his client maintained that he had been coerced into making the statement. Because we had not ample time to ascertain the facts of the matter, we preferred to withhold it rather than to offer it to the tribunal under any questioning
He
doubt.
objects to it, does it? And therefore you haven't put it in?
No, we didn't want to offer it while there was any question about it.
Very well.
Obtained. Might I suggest to the tribunal a recess at this time? I'm sorry to have to say that I'm due to be before the tribunal again for a little while with the, sorry for the tribunal, with the matters on the concentration camps.
Yes, you mean a recess now?
Your Honor, please.
Certainly, yes. 10 minutes.